my beautiful friends. Welcome to True Crime and Wine. If you're new here, hi, hello, welcome. I am Sherilyn, and I am so glad you found me. If you're not new here, welcome back. Thank you for joining me every single upload. I love and I appreciate you so much. We're probably going to have like a little bit of lighting issues to contend with today. Today I am filming in my room. I am in the midst of packing up a bunch of my stuff right now because I'm working on something super special, nerve-wracking, important, just having a hard time processing right now. And so I've got all my gear ready right now because I'm getting on a plane tomorrow. Can't wait to share it with you guys, but that's why we're not in the studio right now. We're gonna get cracking. But I wanted to first thank everybody who headed over to Instagram and sent me and my sister all the birthday love this past weekend. I am still processing all the fun that was had, and it was just made that more special hearing from all of you. I said in my latest Instagram post, the next party I think should be a Sippendale party. So if you don't know already, one thing your girl likes to do is throw a party. You'll have to let me know your thoughts on that, but I think that would be fun. All right, enough about that and me. Let's get into it today. Before we do, I have one more quick message for you. Before we get started, I want to give a huge thank you to today's sponsor, PDS Debt. If you've been here some time, you know we've been working with PDS Debt for a little while now. And part of the reason is that I am very passionate about people finding alternative solutions to paying off their debts. You know me, you know I like to be transparent and keep it real. I have seen some comments where some people will mention that seeking a debt company is not always the best solution for you. And I very much so agree with that statement. I believe that if you have a debt that you can confidently manage and that you are not to the point of being so overwhelmed and maxed out and your interest rates aren't constantly rising and it's not affecting your day-to-day life, then you most likely are able to manage your debt quite successfully on your own. I like to speak from my own experience where there was a point in my life where it was unmanageable. There was a point in my life where I could not keep up with the payments, with the interest rates. My debt was too high and I absolutely needed guidance on what the best solution to get out of it is going to be. It's those situations or situations similar to mine that PDS Debt could be the best solution for you to help pay down your debt. One thing I really like is that they have customized 0% interest options for anybody struggling with credit card debt, loans, medical bills, or collection agencies after you. With things like gas prices through the roof and inflation, there's no better time than now to get serious and make a plan to pay off your debt. I don't know why, but I feel like during the fall and the spring, they almost kind of coincide. Those are times for me where I like to just press the reset button and attain new goals. So as we approach fall, maybe this is something that you want to add to your list. Right now, PDS Debt is giving our qualified listeners a free debt saving analysis just for completing their 30-second online debt assessment over at pdsdebt.com/Dale. With this assessment, you will receive a full breakdown on how to save interest every month and the quickest way to take care of your debt, which is what we're all looking for. What PDS Debt does is they take all of your payments and they put them into one low 0% interest monthly payment, which makes things so much more easy and manageable for you. It also helps take away that stress of making payments on multiple balances and feeling like they're not going anywhere every single month. Everyone with over $10,000 worth of debt or more qualifies. There's no minimum credit score required. Bad or fair credit is accepted. So if this sounds like something that you would like help with and that resonates with you, head on over to PDS Debt. Like I said, they are offering a free debt analysis just for completing their quick and easy debt assessment. Head on over to pdsdebt.com/Dale. That's pdsdebt.com/Dale. Take back your financial freedom today by visiting pdsdebt.com/Dale. Okay, riddle time. A chemist was killed in his own lab. The crime scene had no evidence to be found except for a piece of paper with the names of chemical substances nickel, carbon, oxygen, lanthanum, and sulfur on it. On the day of his murder, he only had 3 visitors: his nephew Nicholas, his wife Martha, and his friend John, who was the killer. All right, today we are taking it to South Pasadena, California, all the way back to 1984. South Pasadena is a suburb town of about 26,000 today, according to a quick census check. And it was also the home to an Ole's Home Center on Fair Oaks Ave, which was a hardware store in a strip mall. On the early evening of October 10th, 1984, a devastating fire broke out in the store. It claimed the life of 4 victims, one of which was only a 2.5-year-old little boy who was there shopping with his grandparents. And it didn't take long for investigators, including one of the most respected fire investigators of the state, to conclude that this fire was deliberate and set intentionally. Unfortunately, it would take thousands of more fires and over 7 years to solve the murders and bring the most unsuspecting killer and arsonist to justice. The night of October 10th started quite standard for most of the employees and shoppers at the Ole hardware store. A 17-year-old high school senior named Jimmy Satina was working at Ole that night. He was a good-looking high school senior, very respected student, phenomenal athlete. He was actually being scouted by the Cubs. And he was also one of 8 children, and his family wasn't very well off, so he got a job at the hardware store so that he could help fund his schooling, which his family couldn't afford, as well as help his family out at home. At about 7:30 p.m., the store was just about to close when Billy and Ada Deal walked in with their grandson, Matthew. He was just 2.5, and in order to get him to want to go into the store, they had to promise him that he was going to be able to get some mint chocolate chip ice cream over at the Baskin-Robbins that was nearby as soon as they left. Since they both had things to do and they wanted to cut down the time as much as possible, they both went their separate ways. Ada and Matthew headed towards the paint aisle and Billy towards the lumber. Carolyn Cross, who was a mother of 2, she had a 3-year-old son and a 2-year-old daughter, was working in the paint aisle that evening. And everybody was just starting to complete their close-up duties, including Jim Obdam, who was just finishing up his shift in the hardware department when he noticed this big cloud of smoke. He rushed through the store to do his best to clear as many staff and customers as he possibly could. He even came across Ada and Matthew and told them, "Don't panic, but you need to leave right away. There's a fire." In those initial moments, though, the smoke wasn't visible to everybody and alarms weren't going off, so that quick responding urgency wasn't there for everybody that was in the store. Jim started walking to the exit to escort Ada and Matthew, and he said when he looked back, he didn't see them anymore, and he quickly did a run and search because they couldn't have got too far, and he sees that Ada's just putting some final things in her cart, and he's like, "I know it's not pandemonium or anything in here right now, but we have to leave. We got to leave right now. You got to put this stuff down. Let's go." He rushes to the exit again, and again, when he looks back, he doesn't see Ada and Matthew with him, but by this point, things had intensified so quickly that all he could see was just a row of flames. Within seconds, he's surrounded by intense heat, thick black smoke, and he knew he was close to an exit, but he couldn't even see it at this point. Billy Deal, Ada's husband and Matthew's grandfather, was in another area, and he heard announcements, but he just thought it was the regular, "You've got 5 minutes to closing." He didn't see any flames, any smoke, so he also just started to gather the final items that he needed and head to the checkout. A few seconds later, a different employee approaches Billy and he says, "There's a fire, we have to leave, and we have to leave right now." And then Billy starts panicking and screaming for Ada and Matthew. He's quickly whisked out of the store and just pushed to safety outside. Jim did his best to do another sweep for Ada and Matthew, but he couldn't see anything. He had gotten himself so low to the ground just to try to grasp whatever piece of air was still down there because the whole place was just full of smoke and flames. It was pretty much as he's thinking and coming to terms with the fact that he's going to die in seconds, he feels around and recognizes that he's right at the exit door, and he's able to push himself out, run to safety, and he looks down and he sees that he's covered in 2nd and 3rd degree burns. Outside, all Billy could do was just run around the parking lot, seeing if he could find his wife and his grandson, and just hoping that they also were pushed out and saved. The fire station was only 3 blocks away, so when he got out there and the firefighters were there, he was just begging for them to go back in. As soon as they entered the building, though, they could already see signs that the fire had flashed over and that there was nothing inside that wasn't engulfed in flames. As these flames are being fought, the captain gets word that just blocks away at a Vaughn's Market, another fire just broke out. Then he finds out that an hour prior to both of these, an Albertson had also just had a fire in their store. At that scene, they had fire expert John Orr investigating, and as he's driving home, from working on that one, he sees all of these flames at the Olay hardware store, so he pulls in. There wasn't too much he could do besides just take photos of the scene, take photos of the people that were surrounding to see if maybe he saw somebody similar in the scene that he had just come from. I think everybody was probably feeling really helpless, including all the family members that had by this point gathered around. For hours, they just waited to see if Ada and Matthew and Jimmy and Carolyn were going to turn up at a hospital somewhere. Maybe they were being driven to safety by somebody who came across them, like a good Samaritan or something. They're just trying to come up with all of these scenarios in their head, not allowing themselves to go to the worst case scenario. It was pretty clear just looking at the building that if they were still in there, there weren't going to be any survivors. The fire was so devastating that it took until after midnight for them just to get it under control. Once they finally did, and it was the next morning, and the investigators were able to come on the scene and do a little bit more of a thorough look, they're pretty overwhelmed. It was a huge feat to try to distinguish what had happened based on the fact that this was a hardware store, so it's full of chemicals, combustible materials, wood. I can only imagine how daunting it would have been. So Jim Allen, another fire investigator, was called to help investigate. I learned a little bit from Joseph Wamba, who wrote the book Fire Lover, about this case, a little bit about fire pattern. And I guess the fire will move up, and as it hits either a wall or ceiling, it follows the path of least resistance, often making a V pattern onward and outward. And so that pattern can help them solve it because it will show where the origin of the fire was, but they didn't have that to go by. Based on the speed and statements from witnesses about how fast it just took over, he believed a large amount of fuel was used to initiate it. And once that started, it just took over like the blink of an eye, like an avalanche just outrunning people that were trying to get out of the store. Allegedly, one of the sergeants that was on the scene seemed like he wanted to wrap the investigation up quite quickly and just push the theory that this was accidental. No one would want to do this on purpose, and this must just be an electrical fire, even though to the investigators it didn't follow that pattern either. Jim and John were pretty upset with that. They didn't want to get on board on signing that off, especially because not only had there already been 2 other fires that night, but over the past 4 years there had been hundreds of fires started here and there. At this point, they're adamant that an arsonist is on the loose, and now they're on the clock to catch this person because it's only a matter of time before they start another fire. And now that they've already killed people, there's clearly no limit to what they're capable of. While they're still on their investigation, about 4 months passes and another fire at another Olay's breaks out. Thankfully, nobody lost their lives or were injured, but it was another indication that this is a serial arsonist, and this is probably the same person. As they're investigating this scene, they get a clue that they hadn't in the other ones, and they find this delay device. It was a cigarette, and it had these 3 matches tied around it with a rubber band, and it was found within some polyurethane foam. The investigators believe that with a delay device like this, whoever lights it has about 15 minutes to get out of the area before a fire will break out, so that there's enough time for them to just haul ass, get out of the scene, and not be considered a suspect. Unfortunately, though, that's where the clues ended. That's all that they had to go on. So in January 1987, 2 years after the Olay fire took the lives of Ada, Matthew, Jimmy, and Carolyn, a fire association conference is held where a bunch of investigators, over 200 of them, come together and they all try to come up with ideas on how to solve this. Apparently, those in this profession are generally quite close and like to stick together. It's often that they will lend a hand on tough cases, so a conference like this is something that they had done multiple times before. John Orr, one of the investigators that was working on the Olay fire case, was spearheading this one, which was actually part of the draw of bringing a lot of these professionals to it because he was seen as like the top guy. He was really great at his job because he loved being the hero. Anytime he could come in clutch, whether it was personally or professionally, he was happy to do so, no matter how big or small the task could be. It could just be, getting ice to save a party. When he was a child, his classmate almost died in a fire with his family when their couch caught on fire. And this was a crucial point in John's life where he wanted to learn more about fires and then how to help prevent them from happening or help solve them if an arsonist was involved. He grew up in a happy home, typical middle-class loving family. His father provided for the family through his sporting good business. It wasn't a huge success. I guess he had to close up that business, open up another one, but he made do. Things were a typical upbringing until he was about 16 years old when his mother just upped and left the family with no explanation. On his 18th birthday, he joined the Air Force, and once he was in there, he was able to transfer into what he had really not ever stopped thinking about since he was in school, which was firefighting school. He married his high school sweetheart, Jody, who came from a big Italian family. They had this big Italian wedding, had all the bells and whistles, and then after the wedding, John and Jody moved to Spain where he was transferred for work. Not gonna lie, I would not be upset about being transferred to Spain for work. They lived there for about 2 years, but John felt very unfulfilled in his career. There weren't many fires that he needed to be tending to, so he was feeling like he wasn't as needed as he wanted to be. When they were transferred back to the US, they moved to Montana, and again, he was only present for about 2 fires. So a year after their move back, he was honorably discharged. At this point, he did a little bit more of the family thing. He and Jody welcomed their first daughter named Carrie Lynn. And after she was born, he was offered a job at the LAPD. Someone said he should apply, that he would be really great at it. And he passed all of his tests and requirements, but not the psychological one. He believed it was because he told the examiner that he saw the map of Italy when he was looking at this picture that clearly looked like one of those, what do you see here? And it really looked like a woman's vagine. And he said he didn't want to sound like a freak, so he just said he saw the map of Italy. Allegedly, the force didn't let him go because of that. They said he needed a few more years to mature and get some more life experiences. He decided to instead apply for the Los Angeles Fire Department, but he was also rejected there because he wasn't quite physically fit and they thought he was too impulsive. He's adamant, though. He wants to be a first responder of sorts, and if he can get into the fire department, that was ideal. So he went to apply at the Glendale Fire Department instead, and this was because the qualifications weren't as strict as it was for the Los Angeles Fire Department, which wasn't the best because the pay also reflected that. He didn't really have a choice, though, because this was the option that was given to him, and Jody was pregnant with their second daughter, a little girl named Lori, so he needed to be able to provide for them, and he got hired on there. This seemed to be a turning point for him, not only in his career, but professionally as well, because one day he did to Jody what his mom did to him and his family, and while she was at work one day, he just packed up the house and left without saying anything. On top of his job at the fire station, he also got a part-time job at a 7-Eleven. He took on night classes at the local college as well for fire sciences and police sciences. Eventually, he landed a job as a daytime security officer at a Sears after he busted this elderly gentleman that was shopping one day. So he was able to quit his job at the 7-Eleven and then work as security and at the station. And having the security guard element and then the firefighting aspect to his life and career, he felt very important. He was allegedly very good at his job. He could bust people left, right, and center. One was actually a bust of a couple who stole over $30,000 worth of items from the store that he caught. But what happened with this new job is he started to feel like he was a legit police officer, and he changed. He had this air about him now, which was odd because after leaving the military, he really didn't like authority figures. He felt that they were very arrogant and walked around like very macho. And now people were describing him the same way. Around the police circuit, they didn't think much of him either. They found that he was a wannabe. There was no one in the city who made more citizens arrests than John did. He always seemed to be, in waiting for somebody to do something illegal. There was no denying he was very eager, maybe some would say, very dedicated to the profession that he wanted to attain, which seemed to be a police officer. Even when responding to fires, he wanted to show that dedication. He would attend almost all of them, even if he was off shift. He was a part of investigating an astronomical amount of fires in the Glendale area. He even caught 2 serial arsonists in 1 week, which is something that had never been done before. It was also unheard of for this area to be hit with so many fires. It got to the point where the fire marshal wanted a specific arson investigator appointed and this new department to be created. John was asked to apply for the position based on his dedication and expertise. He was selected and over the moon because also with the position, he was able to be partnered with a police detective. His name was Dennis Wilson, and finally John felt like he was a part of the team. It didn't take long for the relationship between Dennis and John to sour though. The two of them were butting heads. Dennis felt like he was being partnered with this wannabe tag along. He was even quoted as telling a reporter who came on the scene of a fire that they were investigating that John needed to work on his wannabe image, and that was quoted in the paper. Regardless of what Dennis' opinion was with John, within the fire community, he was very sought after and respected. He even wrote several pieces for the American Fire Journal, and he was being sought after for his opinion and guidance on practically everything that was coming through the station, including being at the scene of one of the most devastating fires of his career at the Ole hardware store. After the Ole's fire, that specifically was all he would talk about solving, which is what led him to wanting to put together a presentation and get feedback and theories from all of the other professionals within the fire community when they were at this conference. Everyone in the room is feeling the urgency. They want to do everything that they can to help, especially because it's John. And then that urgency skyrockets when all of a sudden a fire breaks out at a craft store that was about 2 hours away from this conference. The next evening, another one breaks out at a Payless drugstore. And then days after, one more at a fabric store. No one lost their lives in any of the fire, but substantial damage occurred. And everybody at the conference is on edge because they're thinking it's an arsonist that's taunting all of these fire experts that are in the city. At the scene of the fire at the Craft Mart, one of the fire experts who was at the conference named Marvin Casey was called to the scene. And when he arrives, he finds this delay device. It's another one that was a cigarette with these 3 matches tied around it with rubber bands. As he's logging this into evidence, he gets this phone call that another fire broke out at another craft store. This one's about 2 miles away. It was also thankfully put out very quickly. But he's getting the heebie-jeebies because they're talking about this serial arsonist at this conference, and now all of these fires are breaking out within this small window over in his area, which was in the Fresno area. There were witnesses at the store that were questioned, but there really wasn't much to go on. All of them were pretty confident that they saw somebody that looked suspicious, but none of their descriptions really seemed to match each other. One description was a suspicious blind gentleman that was nearby. Another was a very heavy fisherman. There was also the description of an overweight cowboy. I'd like to know, are we talking about like a little bit of extra weight, like Rip from Yellowstone extra weight? So what Marvin decided to do is make a map of all of the spots that were hit that week. And it seemed like whoever it was close to Highway 99 because all of the fires were within miles of that travel route. To him, it looked like an arsonist lit the fires in Fresno between Tuesday and Thursday, then drove down to Tulare, started 2 on the morning of that Friday, then around noon arrived at Bakersfield and started another 2 more. Within these fires, though, there's finally what they feel like is a light at the end of the tunnel and a possible break because the delay device that he found was still in pretty decent condition. Because this employee had caught it so soon and was able to put the fire out, it went to forensics and they were able to pull a fingerprint. They run it through the database, but unfortunately, it doesn't come up as a match, meaning that it didn't match anybody in the criminal database. Usually this can be very deflating to an investigator, I can imagine. But for Marvin, the more he thought about it, the more he just couldn't shake that it was very coincidental that they just had this conference talking about this arsonist. And now around the area of the conference, this arsonist has made his mark. He had this gut feeling that whoever was starting these fires was somebody that was actually at the conference brainstorming on how to catch this person. He goes to his chief and tells him his theory, and his chief is like, bro, you're nuts. He wanted him to let it go, but he decided to reach out to the ATF and request a list of all 242 names of the attendees at the conference. From there, he broke the list down from 242 to 55, and it was narrowed down by everybody who had traveled there alone because typically serial arsonists fly solo. Within those 55 names, he goes back to his chief, wants his permission now to move forward with the theory. And his chief just sort of says like, okay, fine, but do not let anybody get word of what you're doing because of how close that community works and trusts each other. If there's any sort of accusation that someone within it is doing something like this, it could just like rip that whole community apart. So Marvin started working very quietly behind the scenes and not very quickly. There was not much that he could go off of. He just sort of had to wait and just kind of sift through the names and see if there's any correlation between any of them. So 2 years pass since that last conference when another one is held, and he attends it, but now he's got different eyes. Now at this conference, he lucked out because there were a lot less attendees. So he takes the list from the 55 that he had and applies the 10 to it. And now he has what he believes is a smaller list that is going to provide the name of the person who's been doing this. The conference wraps up, and what do you know it? 2 more fires are started in Southern California. And he's like, bingo is his name-o. Actually, I did not know his name-o yet, but he was getting close. He called the ATF. He's like, hey, hear me out. I think it's somebody who's attending these events. And since this last conference, I've been able to substantially shrink the list. I have a list of 10 names. My gut is just screaming at me that it's one of them. At least help me to silence that if I'm wrong. So the ATF says, okay. And luckily they didn't need to ruffle any feathers and get anybody in the, tight-knit fire investigation group all up in a tizzy, because the ATF had all of their fingerprints on file. Marvin sends in the fingerprint that he had for testing, but unfortunately it comes back that it's unusable. Everyone's trying to stay optimistic though. They believe that it's only a matter of time before this is going to be solved. And while some investigators got caught up in other cases, there were those that stayed dedicated to this one, like Marvin, like John Orr, who a month after attending this last conference was now promoted to fire captain, which kept him super busy because the fires just kept coming up in Glendale. They also took a shift from starting in stores to large areas of land or forests. So we're in 1990 now. It's been 7 years since the hardware killings, and a full neighborhood in Glendale is just obliterated by a massive fire. Thousands of people were evacuated, and it was a miracle that nobody lost their lives. But it was absolutely devastating for all of these families to lose everything that they had. His hands were full, to say the least. This summer particular, the heat was also really, really bad, and the Santa Ana winds were unbearable, making their jobs that much harder. Gerbs. Basically, the area of Glendale was just targeted without mercy. Family homes burning down with all of their possessions, not to mention the emotional trauma that it took on a lot of mothers and fathers who were at work a lot of these times just getting calls from their neighbors saying that their houses were up in flames and they didn't even know if their children were alive and safe. Now, even though the fires had shifted from stores to residences and larger areas, John and his team believed that this was still the same person because throughout some of the wreck, they were finding more of these delay devices in the debris. The issue with solving it, though, was so many of them were happening back to back to back that the team was too small to properly investigate it. They were completely maxed out, and a lot of evidence and proper protocol was being overlooked, and things were slipping through the cracks. And then it's like whoever this person was just went on this rampage. They started hitting places with no rhyme or reason. They would go back to stores, head over to residences, target open fields and forests. And almost at every single scene, John or someone of his team found a delay device. This continued for months. People didn't know where to be safe. They didn't know if they should stay home because fires were happening at home. They didn't want to go to stores because they were happening at stores. So in 1991, members of the ATF catch wind that these fires are getting more brazen, and at each of one, they're finding this delay device. They decided to start a task force, and they called it the Pillow Pyro Task Force because in a lot of these stores where these fires were breaking out, it was usually in like the foam mattress area or the pillow section or somewhere where they had like a lot of plastic too, because that could help ignite the fire and get it going faster if someone wasn't there watching it to get it going. After this task force is created, they find out from someone that's not involved within the Pillow Pyro Task Force that a couple years earlier there was an investigator who was trying to solve this case as well, who had a fingerprint named Marvin Casey, and that they should maybe reach out to him. Marvin tells them he had submitted the fingerprint, and initially it came back that it didn't match anybody in the criminal database, and that when he tried to get it tested against any of the attendees at the conference, it came back unusable. The whole team just feels like there's this gut instinct that maybe it's worth at least a second look. It's all they have to go off of. So the technology that they were using now not only ran criminals, but it also ran law enforcement officials who were not only on the force, but who had applied. And this time it came up with a match. And the match was John Orr, the lead investigator on basically all of these cases, the newly promoted fire captain. He's the one orchestrating these conferences to find out who the person responsible was. He even taught Marvin Casey and got him one of his state certifications. I cannot imagine what that would have felt like as fellow investigators and to all of the people who really looked up to him. As much as they just wanted to go in and get him, they couldn't just pounce. He was put under surveillance for a couple months. He even had a tracker placed on his car at one point. They wanted to get as much indisputable evidence as they possibly could, and they really wanted to make sure that they weren't wrong about this. They find out he's set to attend another seminar that's a few hours away from Glendale. So they follow because the fear is that if it's him, he already likes to set fires on his way to these conferences and on the way back from them. The first evening he arrives at this conference, he checks into this hotel, and like a thriller movie, he discovers this tracking device on his car. So he flies to the police department. He says he's got a bomb attached to his car and he wants the directions to the bomb unit to get it taken off. So the ATF quickly runs in after he leaves, quickly briefs everybody on the situation, gets them to call over on the bomb unit to say, just make something up and make him feel like it is a bomb and not a tracker. So when he arrives, the task says, it's a fake bomb and it must be somebody that's playing a prank on you or somebody else and they just got the wrong vehicle. After this incident, they waited about another month so that they weren't making him feel suspicious and like he was being followed. In the meantime, behind the scenes, on the very few times John had any time to himself, he was writing a book. He had now recently finished the book and actually sent off the manuscript. And the synopsis for his book is: join the investigation as a lead character, arson investigator Phil Landry, as he searches every clue to uncover a serial arsonist. Could it possibly be one of their own? Finally, the investigators following him are given the green light to attach another tracking device. They chose one that was a lot more discreet this time. And this one was also a little bit more high tech, where they didn't have to follow close by to get signals. It would just give like a printout report and just keep track of all of the points that he was at. After attaching that, on October 2nd, 1991, a brush fire broke out in this almost isolated area with a lot of land, and it had a nearby house on it. And the fire spread so fast that it reached the house, and the house completely burnt down. Again, just demolishing a poor family's entire life. Thankfully, nobody was home at that time, so they didn't lose their life, but they lost everything that they owned. For whatever reason, this fire flew under the radar for the Pillow Pyro Task Force. So they never were even able to look at the map that he had of his coordinates to know about this and see if he was in the area. So it wasn't until a few weeks later when an acquaintance of his and also an acquaintance of one of the task force members is driving, and he drives by John. He's off duty, but he decides to just keep a little eye on him, sees that he drives into the south area, and minutes later there's this huge billowing of smoke coming up. Now, it could be a coincidence. There wasn't actually eyes on him. He contacts his friends in the task force, lets them know, and they know that if he's the guy, he works in a pattern. And if there's one fire, it's not going to take long for another one to come. Sure enough, minutes later, another one started. Finally, now the task force is able to pull his coordinates from the first fire and the second and show that his vehicle was just meters from both scenes. Not only that, but on the last fire, The first responders that got there noted that John Orr was already at the scene, saying that he had just drove by and saw smoke and he was recording the fire. They put together an arrest warrant, and days later, as he's leaving his house on his way to go to work, he is finally arrested. In his work bag, they found even some more incriminating evidence, like a pack of smokes, and matches, and he wasn't a smoker. They also found a pack of rubber bands, all materials that were used to construct these delay devices. I also watched a segment on this case, and I felt so bad when he was arrested because it was on the news, and his poor daughter was at her boyfriend's at the time when all of this was unfolding, and he was like, oh, your dad's on the news, and she just didn't really think much of it because he was on the news a lot in interviews and as like the fire chief. And then when she finally decides to sit down and watch it and see that he's being arrested for doing all of these things, my heart sank for her, because of course our main focus is always the victims and their families. But I just can't imagine the pain that I'm sure families, specifically children of killers, feel. They never wanted their loved one to be that person. They probably never thought that they could be. So it's also a loss for them too, because that's got to be such a feeling of betrayal and something that you never want to be associated with. On top of all of the evidence that they already had on him, when they searched his property, they just found thousands of photos that he had taken of these fires, and all of the witnesses watching, this work that he had done that he had never placed into evidence. He just kept for himself. And the book that he wrote ended up probably being one of the stronger pieces of evidence. He was denying any involvement. But in this book, it seemed like there was absolutely no denying that it was him, based on real things that had happened. Within the book, it was the delay device that was found at all these scenes described the exact same way. It detailed how at a lot of these scenes, it was the pillow area or the foam area or the fabric area that was used to get these flames ignited. Within the book, it also gave a little bit of insight as to what the motive was, which explained that the arsonist character in this book did this because it provided sexual satisfaction. One of the most incriminating parts of the books is when he talks about an event that happened at a hardware store. This is supposedly fiction, but he mentions a grandmother and a grandson talking about how when they were done, they were going to go to the ice cream store and get some mint chocolate chip ice cream, and that character's name was Matthew. So the belief is that he heard that conversation as he was leaving the store, knowing that this family and this little boy was about to go in that store after he had lit this fire. A few of John's women that were in his past had come forward after this, believing that his intentions were always to harm people. They believed he was really twisted. One of them said during one of their escapades, pulled out a gun in the middle of it and held it to her head and said he was going to blow her brains out. That makes more sense. Another said he just handcuffed her one day and then just left her there. Since he has never confessed to anything, there's no way for sure to find out how many fires John was responsible for, but it's estimated that he was responsible for over 2,000 fires. Absolutely disgusting. Initially, he was also only convicted of 6 counts of arson and sentenced to 30 years in prison. But 4 years after his sentence, he was convicted of 4 counts of murder and finally sentenced to life. I don't know about you, but my mind kept going to how that employee who got the fire out so quick that they were able to get that delay device and use the only fingerprint that they had. I mean, he needs his own store. He doesn't even need a raise. I mean, now he's probably retired, but I hope he got it. I have just felt sick about this case. It's one of those ones where you just feel like really frustrated. Without him confessing, you're left with a bunch of speculation. His book, for the most part, pretty much seems like a journal, which is twisted in itself because it lays out the fact that his motive was like sexual gratification. But there's also the assumption from other people that he harbored a lot of resentment for police, and that when he wasn't chosen and he was seen as like a wannabe, he was doing something that was going to give him a form of validation. If he was doing something that they couldn't solve, it made him feel smarter than them, more skilled than them, and gave him this sick sense of pride and power, which I guess is not really out of the realm of possibilities. These were his own words about pyromaniacs. In one of his write-ups, he says, "Fire becomes a friend they can count on. It brings attention, admiration, self-esteem, friends, and heroes. Like a drug addict, one good score leads to the desire for another." Which brings you back to thinking of how sickening it is that his own personal gratification and pride took the lives of 4 victims in what I would consider probably one of the worst ways to die. Absolutely deplorable. I surely hope there is no exception to you not spending the rest of your life in prison, John Orr. Alright, you guys, that is it for me today. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It means the world to me. I love and I appreciate you so much. The answer to today's... I don't know why that's so hard for me to say. To today's riddle is, one quick reminder, a chemist was killed in his own lab. The crime scene had no evidence to be found except a piece of paper with the names of chemical substances, nickel, carbon, oxygen, lanthanum, and sulfur on it. On the day of his murder, he had only 3 visitors: his nephew Nicholas, his wife Martha, and his friend John. Who was the killer? And the answer is Nicholas, because when you combine the symbols of the chemical substances, you get the name Nicholas. All right, you guys, I will see you in the next video. I will miss you terribly. Until then, make sure to love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon.